Very good. Good morning, everyone. What is today? Wednesday, I'm going to go with February 14th. Happy Valentine's Day to you all. You are all my Valentines. Nice to see you all. This is the C4 Metro Subcommittee. I am joined by my esteemed co-chair, Commissioner Savas, and a fine group of people. And since I think we all know each other, I don't see any new faces. Kenny's joining us for the first time, and it's always a pleasure to have him as part of these groups. And so, Kenny, I'd like to see you at every single meeting that I have going forward. Be nice to have you there. And so we have a lot of fun things to cover today. Commissioner Savas, anything you'd like to share before we kind of jump into the meat of the meeting?
No, fire away, and hopefully we'll get more of our members to there's another one. Excellent. More of our members to join us. So
Perfect.
Mayor Milch is coming on.
Very good, very good. And so for our first information today is our JPAC update. And so Brian, if you would is actually
Yes.
The question is Karen with us so far?
Yes, she is. She's coming on right now.
Perfect.
And Karen, would you like me to promote Jamie as well?
Yes, I think that would make sense because we'll roll quickly into the TPAC piece.
Great.
Excellent. Karen, good morning. I love how long your title is nowadays. It just keeps getting longer and longer.
That's my goal, to fill up the whole space of the Zoom.
Perfect. Good morning. The floor is yours.
Good morning, everyone. It's nice to see you on this morning. So today we're going to be talking about a variety of different items. And so the first one we just will touch on briefly, which is basically the JPAC materials. Tomorrow is the monthly JPAC meeting. And many of the items within JPAC are going to be touched on both in the TPAC overview, because TPAC often, the way it's set up is TPAC hears these items before JPAC. But then we'll also have a presentation later today from Ted Labeled from Metro to go a little deeper into the items as well. So on the agenda tomorrow there's going to be a discussion, as there always, well, actually it's not a discussion, it's part of the consent agenda with regards to MTIP amendments. So there will be a series of amendments to the MTIP, and there are two that I wanted to highlight. One is an amendment to be able to start to program the bus rapid transit project along 82nd Avenue. It's the first $30 million kind of moving forward. There was actually a portion of it that was programmed last month, and the remaining portion is being programmed this month. This allows the project to move forward, and for TriMet and Metro to request being put in the small starts program, and then eventually allow, which will allow the local match to start to be accounted for when we're spending dollars, our local dollars. It can be kind of accounted for. So that's one. It's a fairly significant amount of money. And then the second piece is with regards to the MTIP amendment, is that there is the amendment to program the funds, their carbon reduction program funds for the transit signal priority project along line 33. That's along McLaughlin. And so that was a conversation that occurred last year about how to end the carbon reduction funds. And that was one of 4 projects that the Metro's Carbon Reduction Fund program will be funding. So that's really high level on what those MTIP amendments are. And then the next 2 items that will be heard tomorrow, we'll have a deeper discussion of. One is going to be the MTIP program direction and kind of the work that's associated with that. And then there'll be an update of the 2023 RTP. All that work that was concluded at the end of last year keeps rolling forward. So we're going to highlight what the next steps really are. What are the outcomes from the 2023 RTP, which means what projects are we now working on, and what Metro is now working on. So with that, that's a real sort of high level of the JPAC agenda. But I think that we're just gonna roll into the TPAC item, and maybe I'll have Jamie Lorenzini talk about really what the outcomes of TPAC were. As you all know, there is a wonderful memo in your packet. And let me get the page number of that. Let's see, it's page 5. It's PDF page 5 of your packet, which is kind of the kind of summary of what we discussed at TPAC. But I'm going to let Jamie walk through a couple of the items.
Thanks, Karen, and good morning, everyone. At TPAC, we covered a lot of ground at the last meeting. I'll touch a little bit more deeply on 2 items and a little bit more lightly on another item that'll be covered later in this meeting. First and foremost, Metro is beginning phase 2 of what's called the Regional Emergency Transportation Routes Project. This project dates back to 2019, where Metro and regional partners worked together to reassess the emergency transportation route system in the region. And as a result, we came out with, I think, over 1,000 miles, 1,200 miles of emergency transportation routes. Building on the work of phase 1, Metro is initiating a new phase of the project to develop a route tiering methodology and prioritization framework for the tiers, as well as exploring approaches for developing operational guidance and implementation recommendations. While all emergency transportation routes are all hazard routes, a tiering and prioritization process could help the region to designate which routes should be evaluated, cleared, and opened first in a catastrophe. Additional research on operational guidelines could also help the region understand best practices for determining who's responsible to do what with the routes and their bridges, such as maintenance, investments, and operational decisions. In the near future, the project team will be convening a work group of transportation planners and emergency professionals, so staff level, and each jurisdiction will get 1 seat at the table. That said, each jurisdiction can also specify alternates, and the project staff is looking for names by the end of the month. So I suspect your staff are already discussing which representatives they want at the table, but it might be something to keep an eye on. And we'll hear more about this great project in the future. Are there any questions before I move on? Hearing none, going once, going twice, sold, and on to the MTIP revenue forecast. So government never stops, so neither do we. Metro is in the process of forecasting available revenue for the 2027 to 2030 Metropolitan Transportation Improvement Program, also called MTIP. At this time, Metro estimates that there will be $1.1 billion in available revenues for federal fiscal years 2027 to 2030. This number comes with a grain of salt, however, because this revenue forecast does not include any revenue from projected tolling or pricing programs. Metro and ODOT are continuing to discuss the appropriate revenue estimate to include in the snapshot, and once they come to an agreement, Metro will revise the revenue forecast. So we've got a good starting place, but there's more information to come. And then, Karen, if you'd like, I can also touch on the REFA and MTIP policy directions, or hold that until later in the meeting.
I think we should go ahead and touch on it right now, just from like what we heard at TPAC, and then Ted will be able to give his presentation, and then maybe we'll also be able to have then a full conversation.
Okay, cool. So I know not everyone here deals with transportation all the time. It might be helpful to lay a little bit more orientation around what the MTIP is meant to accomplish. Unlike the RTP, which sets long-term regional policy, the MTIP outlines the implementation schedule of federally funded transportation projects over a 4-year horizon. The revenues set the capacity of the region to make long and short-term transportation investments without overexpending the revenues we have on hand. And Additionally, and let me scroll down. Okay. Additionally, it allows coordination between Metro and the federal government to schedule when federal dollars will become available to a project, which means that those dollars are contractually committed by USDOT to reimburse project expenses. Metro is looking at adopting the MTIP in 2026, and that adoption process will include the 2028 to 2030 Regional Flexible Fund allocation. Many of you are familiar with the Flexible Fund allocation, also called RFA, because this is the mechanism we use to fund competitive local transportation projects. Before we get to that stage, however, Metro and regional partners have to talk through policy direction that will inform the funding of RFA projects. So over the next several months, TPAC, JPAC, Metro, all the parties will be coming together to have a dialogue about what values should inform the next round of MTIP and RFA funding. As we start thinking about that, it's an opportunity to look back on our last round of funding. And RFA is kind of a unique animal where it's only one of the many funding streams that is available in the region, and it only constitutes about 5% of our funding. That said, it's one of the few revenue tools out there that can be used to fund projects. But because it's federalized money, it's also incredibly expensive. During the last cycle, we experienced kind of a unique phenomenon where some counties came in with a very modest ask and may have put forward few projects, and not all of those projects were funded, and some concerns were raised about geographic parity of the Regional Flexible Fund allocation and where those dollars go. The tension in this conversation is that with federal money, the federal government is very firm that we cannot sub-allocate dollars on a geographic level. So we can't say Clackamas County ask for at least, or Clackamas County, you will be awarded at least $10 million. The federal government doesn't like that, so we don't get to do that. But this policy direction moment or pause before we start funding projects is an opportunity to really come in with a dialogue and say, hey, based on last cycle, what could we do better in the future? And should we place emphasis on any particular aspect of the funding process, such as safety or economic prosperity? So whereas we can't sub-allocate dollars, this could also be a moment to talk about what does regional parity look like as a program objective, and how can we reduce barriers for small agencies to make the process more accessible for everyone in the region. Karen, do you have anything else to add?
So I think that's a really good introduction to, as Jamie said, the process that we're beginning right now, right? We're setting the foundation for what the direction for how the types of projects that the regional flexible funds, RFA, will be able to fund, and what your jurisdictions may apply for. So this is the beginning of the conversation, but even when there's a beginning, it will go quickly. I believe that the conversation is going to be expected to about, with regards to program direction, JPAC will be hearing about this and making some recommendations on direction in April. But we're now beginning that conversation. So I think that one of the, what we'll end up doing, and what my recommendation is that we go ahead and if you guys have any questions right now, we can take those questions, but we may want to hear from Ted as well, because he'll be giving us some sort of more details about what the next steps around the MTIP are. And then we could also have a kind of a fuller conversation about maybe initial thoughts that the C4 Metro team has around project direction, or either program direction, or maybe just reflections on the last process.
Very good. Commissioner Savas, please.
Yeah, I know that these things can get kind of complicated, and before we get too far along, I thought I would just touch on, and maybe this will help prime Ted in his comments, but as we have here at C4 Metro have tried to work on for several years, and when recognized many years ago that preparation is everything when it comes to some of these opportunities, MTIP being one of them. Criteria, we have talked about that over the years. It doesn't seem like it's ever the same. It's always changing. And, when we think we might qualify for something, the next year or the next cycle's criteria seems to change. And how prepared we are and how staffed maybe some of our smaller cities are is always a concern, knowing that some jurisdictions have substantial staff and are more prepared for it and more nimble, if you will. So that's just something I would want to talk about as a criteria. That said, I want to go back to the carbon conversation a little bit on those monies and only make a comment. I'm not sure all of you know, and Councilor Lewis, I'm glad you're here. Like to hear your thoughts on what a better understanding of apparently a claim or a suit against the against Metro or JPAC, I'm not sure which, regarding the RTP regarding carbon. And for those of you who were paying attention to that discussion at the JPAC table, I'm not associating myself or aligning myself with anyone here, so I don't want to get this misconstrued. But my concern over really this topic of carbon reduction and the monies that come with it is ideally having positive, measurable impacts towards that goal of reducing carbon emissions. I just want to make that perfectly clear. That's where I'm coming from, and my consternation with the conversation at the JPAC table has been that we really don't measure it. We just make assumptions, somewhat, that in practice or in theory, that if we do X, then we'll have really, or we spend X, we are making a move towards meeting those goals. And I think that there is, in some instances, there is validity to some of those concepts and maybe how they play out in certain areas, geographic areas or jurisdictions, but that doesn't apply universally. Every area is unique, situations are unique, and this stop and go traffic issue is something that obviously has grabbed the attention of a lot of large firms in the country in their effort to reduce carbon emissions, Google being one of them, the most recent one up in the Seattle area with the pilot project. But all that said, I just want to see if Councilor Lewis can just enlighten us a little bit on this claim. I'm not sure I totally understand it. And I want to make sure that when we are approving or appropriating dollars towards carbon reduction, that there's actually something we have to grab on, or a metric we can identify that is going to render a positive result on carbon reduction. Councilor?
Very good, please.
Sure. Thank you, Commissioner. It is generally unwise to, as a non-attorney, speak like an attorney. Metro attorneys are not on, so I am not going to claim that I can fully help you understand the lawsuit here today. If either Kim or Ted want to take a whack at it, just raise your hand. We'll bring you over. But the crux of the issue here is that there are a number of data sets that have to be integrated into the RTP based off of what's in state policy. So some of them are what percentage of cars are going to be large, heavy vehicles, what percentage of cars are going to be the fuel efficient cars. And so in certain places in the RTP, we use the state data, and in certain parts of the RTP, we use different data sets. So this is a lawsuit about, did we use the right data at the right places at the right time? And the opportunity to get really wonky and really technical exists, but not on my level of knowledge, and probably not on this call. So Commissioner, I would encourage you to have a follow-up, either with technical staff at your agency or with technical staff from Metro. But the opportunity here is to look forward to actual programs that are not weighed down by this lawsuit. So this is a technical, did you use the right data at the right time lawsuit versus are our programs, are our climate smart policies the right ones? And I will stand by the smart policies. They have not been contested.
Okay, thank you, Counselor, for taking a stab at that.
Very good. Thank you for the comments, Mayor Milch.
I just had a question for Jamie for clarification. You mentioned one classification of revenue that you didn't have a complete picture of because it didn't include possible congestion pricing, tolling revenue from the state of Oregon. So what are the other major sources of that revenue that's in that program now that these others are not a part of? Because those are state collected. Are you talking about federal dollars or other state dollars?
We're talking, so the MTIP includes three primary sources of revenue, and Karen might have to help me out. It's our air quality dollars, our I'm guessing federal formula dollars. Karen, if you can nod at me.
I actually, at this point, a question like that is best answered by Ted, who's coming up next, and then as he will have a much kind of clearer knowledge of exactly the funding revenues that go into the MTIP. So that's what I would say.
All right, thank you. I'll defer to Ted. Sorry to put you on the spot, Jamie and Karen.
That's okay.
And this is going to be my new favorite answer of the day. When in doubt, defer to Ted.
I think that seems reasonable. Can I, Jamie, just a question? You know, you had talked about RFFA not being able to be sub-allocated regionally, but then you kind of touched on the idea of emphasizing topics or like, you know, safety, certain types. Will that potentially distribute differently geographically based on the thing that we're kind of looking at? Is that a way of doing an end run and creating a different geographic distribution based on the kind of thing that we're looking at?
Yeah, I can chime in, or can defer to Councilor Lewis if she'd like to respond first.
Jamie, why don't you answer technically and then I'll answer politically.
Yeah, so I think the way the criteria are shaped will always impact the type of projects that are submitted. However, I think there can sometimes be challenges in communicating the benefits of a project in the language that's being requested. And a mobility project can have major safety benefits or can have major climate benefits, and sometimes that's difficult to communicate in the language that's being requested. That said, I think the bigger barrier that we run into is, as a federal project, these are difficult to administer and they're more expensive. And how do we break down barriers for smaller jurisdictions so the application pool has more applications from a larger geographic area in the region, increasing the probability that those projects may be selected and we can better distribute the dollars?
And then the political answer is, I don't know if you remember 2 REFA cycles ago, we had 2 layers of program. One was focused on all modalities and including making sure that we had bike ped and safe streets for all. Then the other was a very specific layer of policy that we wanted to guide those funds to expedite freight movement in the region. And oftentimes getting bikes off the roads that freight needs to be making turns on would also mean that you're investing in multimodal facilities, but with an emphasis on freight movement. So they were two different buckets of money or two different layers of policy that the funds were allocated through. And as that had happened for several cycles, uh, you would see that the freight money was far less competitive than the bicycle, walk ped, all modality funding. So you would start to see, as that happened for several years, eventually 2 years ago, you had a lot of projects that applied and said, we could be funded out of either bucket because we are about multi-modes and we're also about freight mobility. So what started out as a way to potentially frame your project so that you were going into the bucket that was less competitive, by the time we were at the end of the cycle, we actually had a bunch of projects that were like, we're super competitive because you can fund us out of both buckets. So the opportunity, I think, is for us to determine what criteria are important for the region, but that we uniquely could win on, or that we uniquely have answers to, in our part of the region. If that makes any sense to you, Counselor Sherman.
It does, and I'm always kind of thinking through like, okay, so in certain circumstances, then is there enough coordination where if we've got a project that could be funded from different sources, are we able to apply a project in FFA versus somewhere else, and make sure that we're optimizing kind of where this money is spent ultimately, or where the sources are coming from, I guess I would say. Okay, Commissioner Sandus.
Yeah, just one last thought, and I appreciate the technical and the political, so I'll just chime in, just kind of cruise in right in the middle at the practical level, maybe. At least I think I am, and that is this getting back to the criteria, and again, whether it's at the local level or whether it's at the federal level, my observation after all these years is that the suburban areas within the metro boundary seem to be getting farther and farther behind, and whether it's transit or other things or investments in our roadways, and the other areas of the region are seem to be advancing, and I know it's not a lot of money, and I know our needs are far greater, so but we're not really chipping away at the areas where I think that there's the most need. So I guess that's one of and you heard me say this before, it does pain me that we are a lot of Clackamas County being suburban, more so than metropolitan. But in the guise of, or in the concern of, again, air quality or safety, from my past experience, lived experience, and business experience, and air quality, there's a huge opportunity to make advances in the climate aspect, the carbon reduction aspect, but the monies don't come with it. So that's what I'm hoping we can make some advance in, and just want to put that out there. You've heard me say that before. Dwight, you and I have talked about things like this before. Transit is a big part of the solution, but yet we don't have very much out here. So I'll leave it there. Thank you.
Very good. Thank you. Other questions, comments before we transition to a new topic? Or Karen, Jamie, anything you'd like to leave behind on the floor? Very good. All right, we will move into let's see. The MPAC update is next, and looking around the room, I guess that's me. So we last met, MPAC was January 24th. We also covered the EPA Carbon Pollution Reduction Grant Program. That was one of the things we did cover. Karen had mentioned that earlier. The four kind of major projects being proposed: transit electrification, which is being led by TriMet, transit signal priority, which is also a combination of TriMet and Metro, money for a composting facility, which is being led by Gresham, and $5 million to fund energy efficiency and affordable housing, which is being led by Metro as well. And so those are moving forward. I think the grants are due on April 1st. And I don't know if I've got anything else to add on that topic. And then we also had an economic panel talking about kind of the state of Oregon and the economy currently. right up my alley. Love this kind of stuff. You know, the projection, and economists can project all kinds of things. So let's just, you know, put this in a bucket of economists are, you know, experts in their world, but they're just making projections. And so, you know, the notion is that Oregon's looking like it may actually be able to achieve a soft landing. But you know, obviously that's not a guarantee. The labor market definitely has cooled down, but it's still very tight. You know, Oregon typically has been very productive historically, and while we're outperforming the country in job and population growth, you know, one thing that's really kind of notable is that labor is getting more and more efficient, more productive over time. However, in Oregon, what's being a drag on our economy is that population growth has stalled. More people are moving out of the state than coming into the state, and that has certainly impacted our economy long term. Obviously, you know, an impact is also that we've historically underbuilt housing, and affordability issues. You know, residential affordability issues are certainly a drag on the economy long term as well. So I think that's all I've got for an MPAC update this week. Next meeting's on February 28th. And I think we're going to get an update on the garbage and recycling systems facilities plan, and potentially an update on the preliminary UGB capacity estimates needs. Questions, comments, thoughts?
Counselor, has there been any discussion at MPAC, or do you foresee any discussion that charging stations are more efforts to increase the number of charging stations from a land use standpoint are you know, coming? It just seems to me, and I've heard this before, and I had to reflect on this weekend talking to people much younger than I am, saying they live in an apartment, they can't buy an electric car because they have nowhere to charge it. And so we keep on building all this high density housing, a lot of apartment buildings and so forth, and no place to charge that they can practically do. They can't charge at work, they can't charge at home, and they have a busy schedule. And there's very few places in the area where they can charge. You know, there is a small one there in Milwaukee, but it's not convenient for a lot of people. So I'm just wondering if there is a greater requirement or foreseeable requirement that would have X amount of built charging stations in some of these housing, especially the public housing aspect. I know that the infrastructure is being put in the ground in some of these cases, but it's not actually being available to folks. So that's my question, and I'm just wondering if that is going to be a topic for MPAC at some point in the future.
I think that is a solid topic for discussion. I don't remember if Senate Bill, is it 1537, incorporates charging station infrastructure as kind of part of the commitment going forward. I mean, you know, having a lived experience, my daughter lives in a condo in California. They have, you know, 100 units and one charger in the garage. And so, you know, in California, you would think that'd be a place where they'd have a bunch of them, but they don't. So her trying to use that essentially just means she has to go to a charging station as an actual activity during the day, something she has to plan for, get in line and wait for a supercharger to open up so that you can use it. So not terribly efficient. So Commissioner Savas, I think your point is well taken. I will include that as part of the conversation. Councilor Stavengert, I saw you had your hand up, and I apologize for speaking over you.
Oh, no worries at all. I wanted to appreciate the mention of Electric Avenue in Milwaukee. You're all welcome to visit anytime you need a charge. And I don't know if other cities are doing this or not, but we have a couple of utility pole chargers that PGE is putting in around Milwaukee. And I'm curious, you know, so those are available for public use and could feasibly be used by folks who don't have chargers at their residence, although you would have to travel to that location. But are other cities doing things like that?
Well, I know that in our multifamily housing, we are requiring the wiring to be installed, the infrastructure for it, but I don't think we're, you know, it's not mandating the actual charger yet. But I do think, I mean, I'm a layperson, but it doesn't seem like a financially onerous requirement to have for like multifamily housing. It seems like a very reasonable thing to incorporate as part of that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it does seem like just by the nature of the market, some developers are going that way. The ones that I'm talking about that are kind of in the wild are built off of utility poles. And so you would, you'd access the charger and then pull the, the nozzle down and connect it to your EV. So it's kind of fascinating. We have one, I believe, that's up and running now with a couple of others in the pipeline. So I can get numbers and maybe report back at a future meeting.
Interesting. I like that.
Yeah, if I could just build on this make one last point, in the same vein here is that, a lot of apartment dwellers, that I happen to either know their kids or know them personally or both, express that, they're gonna forestall their purchase of an electric vehicle until they have a place to charge it. So, they're forced to stay where they are with what they have, which is gas powered or in some cases diesel. The other issue that comes up also with them is that they're having a harder and harder time finding parking, right? As parking is being reduced, they have very little place to park. One of the folks I spoke to this weekend said, I drove around for a half an hour before I could actually find a place to park or wait for a place to open up to park. So that's really impacting people's lives. And I think it just seems to be counterintuitive that if we're reducing parking and we're not adding charging stations or we're not adding transit, it doesn't seem that reducing parking or charging parking is a practical thing to do if you have where you have no transit. Those of you who know where the transit lines are know that Milwaukee, to their benefit, has more transit probably than any town in Clackamas County, which is great. But the rest of the county, even in the metro boundary, is really lacking in that area. So I'm glad to hear that about that power pole thing. But Counselor, the only thing I would add is that the cords aren't long enough. If the cord was 200 feet long, perhaps there might be a place to connect it, but you have to have the parking and the pole within close proximity. Thank you.
I put some additional information into the chat if folks are interested.
Okay, thank you.
Very good. All good comments. I mean, I think this is one of our kind of long-term transportation conundrums. The idea that post-pandemic, the notion of hub and spoke public transportation systems may not work in all situations at all times. The timing of day of commutes has made it very difficult to hire transit drivers because you don't have as much peak early morning and late afternoon. And in my mind, it disregards the importance of EV moving forward and autonomous EV vehicles that will communicate with each other that are going to be much more efficient at delivering someone from point A to point B in a carbon-friendly environment, not relying on a 70-person bus to try to kind of satisfy that need. So, I mean, I think all of these infrastructure discussions are good discussions to have even over just kind of the near-term solutions we're trying to accomplish. So, other comments on MPAC before we transition? All right. Next up, we've got our RTP implementation and MTIP process update by Ted. If we can bring him over, and we'll get it rocking and rolling.
Yeah, I'm pointing to that right now.
Very good.
Good morning, Ted. Thank you for being here. And did you have a co-presenter, or did you want me to pull up Kim?
Yeah, she's not going to co-present, but she will be available for questions. I'm going to just cover the whole presentation myself, and but Kim is the expert on parts of it, so that would be great.
Great. Pulled her up, and you feel free to share your screen.
Okay, yeah, and okay, great. There we go.
Perfect.
So good morning, everybody. Again, I'm Ted Liebold with Metro. I'm the manager of the Metropolitan Transportation Improvement Program section at Metro, and I have with me Kim Ellis, who's a principal planner, who is the lead staff person on the development of the regional transportation plan that just wrapped up at the end of last year. And we're going to give an update on the next steps in terms of the implementation of the regional transportation plan, And then one of the things that it specifically directed us to do was to update the Metropolitan Transportation Improvement Program. I'm just going to say MTIP from now on, the MTIP process when we do amendments specific to the regional mobility pricing project and tolling projects in the region. So I do want to emphasize there was a lot of discussion earlier on with the TPAC agenda or JPAC agenda that delved into the program direction for the MTIP and for the regional flexible fund allocation. This presentation isn't about that. There will be a whole separate presentation on that at JPAC, but I'm happy to also answer questions about that after we're done. But just wanted to clarify there. So again, today we just wanted to provide an overview of the regional transportation plan and what it's directing us to do in our work program, and then describe and receive input from you on the procedures, the update of the procedures that we're going to do to the MTIP amendment process for those tolling and pricing projects. So at a high level, and this is Kim's area of expertise, but I'm going to cover it really quickly. The initiatives that are going on have actually already started that the RTP has directed further work on is listed on this slide. I'm not going to go through each element. I just want to give you a high level taste here of the different projects or planning projects that are going to be going on. These are ones that are listed here that are already underway. And I think just of interest to you is possibly the investment areas planning for the 82nd Avenue Transit Project, which does reach down to the Clackamas Regional Center. Next slide. There's initiatives that are going to be getting started this year. That includes the update to the Metropolitan Transportation Improvement Program, which I'm sure you'll be asking about in a moment or afterwards, but also the regional flexible funding allocation as a part. The regional flexible funding allocation is a component, an element of the MTIP, but it's only one element of the entire MTIP. And then also the third thing of listed here that we're going to get into more detail on specifically is the update to the MTIP amendment process for those tolling and pricing projects. Next slide. And then there's additional work that will be coming later, probably starting after this year, but before to get going and before the next update to the regional transportation plan, which has to be completed in 5 years from now. So all of this work should be underway or completed by that time. Next slide. So now let's talk specifically about the MTIP change management or the MTIP itself, because we did receive some direction to update that amendment process. But just more holistically, we do adopt the MTIP once every 3 years as a holistic document, and all of the different allocation processes that take place beforehand all get incorporated into the MTIP as a package. And we just did our last adoption of the MTIP. I want to say it was June of last year. So it was the middle of last year. But then what happens is the MTIP is a living document, right? So it has all of the projects that receive federal funding in the region have to be included in the MTIP to be eligible to receive those funds. And so as funding amounts change year to year, and as projects go through their project development process and their schedules may change, we have to make adjustments to the MTIP or so we have change management procedures. That's why we have almost every month on the JPAC agenda a list of amendments. But we also have we can also do administrative adjustments for smaller scale changes. So there's those types of changes, but then we do have, like I said, monthly amendments, and we've divided those up into what we call regular amendments, and then a special category called major project amendments. Go ahead with the next slide, please. So when we receive a request from an agency that has federal funds programmed in the MTIP, and they need to make a change to that programming, they submit a request to us. We go through an analysis and documentation of that analysis. If it's a full amendment rather than just administrative adjustment, we present that analysis to a public comment period and then take the amendment request through our MPO adoption process, which goes through the Transportation Policy Alternatives Committee, our technical committee that advises JPAC to the Metro Council, and then there is an action by JPAC and approval by the Metro Council. Next slide. So what is the analysis and documentation that we do? Some of it is technical in nature in terms of having to meet some of the federal requirements. And that's really getting at, Jamie mentioned this earlier, we look at the funding eligibility. So the type of funds that the federal funds that are proposed to be spent on that project, there's lots of different types of federal funds, and they all have specific eligibility criteria that are used. And so the project that is being implemented have to be an eligible expense for that fund type. And so we check that and make sure that that's meeting those requirements. It also, as Jamie mentioned, has to be what we call fiscally constrained. And that just means we know how much money is available to be spent in a year from each fund type. And we need to make sure that so we're keeping track of the total. And so each project comes in and they have to demonstrate to us that they're not overspending that federal amount, but that they're also providing the required local match that is going to fully fund that project, so that that US DOT can go in and confidently contract with them to reimburse their project expenses and know that project is going to get built. And then finally, we do a consistency check with the regional transportation plan. And that means we go back and look at the constrained or financially constrained regional transportation project list. So that means that when we put together the regional transportation plan, we did a long range estimate of how much funding would be available in the region. And the projects that came in and got included in the plan needed to come under that total budget of expected available revenues. And so that's that constrained list. We make sure it's on there and that it was consistent in terms of its project scope description and how it was analyzed in the plan, and make sure that that project is consistent with how it was described in the plan. And then we do a look at, is that project actually addressing the relevant policies and directives that the plan has provided to us? So that's the big picture of our regional transportation plan consistency check. Go ahead, Kim. So with so we do that for all amendments, but for major projects, and major projects, as we define them, are projects that are approximately $100 million or more in total cost, and or would have a significant measurable impact on the motor vehicle capacity on the regional system. Those are what we call major projects. For all of those, we do analysis on the regional transportation planning's investment priority goals, which I've listed there. You'll see there equitable transportation, safe system, climate action and resilience, mobility, and thriving economy, which is a new, actually a new priority investment area that was just adopted with the new RTP this last year. So we will analyze the projects in terms of how they will impact the complete package of MTIP projects in terms of moving the needle in any direction, either towards goals or away from or detracting from goals for each of these 5 areas using different performance measures. And then we also do a consistency check with what's called the congestion management process. And that really is a check against that they've gone through, these projects have gone through an analysis of implementing and considering things such as demand management, system management, ability to have transit or walk or bicycle modes meet demand in a project area before they are actually building new vehicular capacity where it already exists. Next slide. So in the 2023 RTP, as that got adopted back in, I believe it was November, there was direction in the adoption ordinance that JPAC approved, which gave us MTIP staff new direction that for the regional mobility pricing projects and the tolling projects, that we would have ODOT provide additional documentation for that major project analysis on these following areas. And these are, I'll go ahead and just read through them a little bit. So this is additional information that ODOT will provide to us that we will then provide to TPAC, JPAC, and the Metro Council as they're making their amendment decision to either include it to support inclusion of these projects in the MTIP or not. And so this additional information will be provided, and it's really about implementing the project agreements that were developed for each of these projects through when they were going through their project development and I call it NEPA. It's a National Environmental Policy Act process. So each of these projects, as they were going through their project development, have come to JPAC and the Metro Council and said, here's some things we're committing to do. And so they will have to, as ODOT submits an amendment request to bring funding into the MTIP for these projects, they'll have to report back on the progress in meeting the commitments they made in each of those project agreements. The second item there is documentation on how they're consistent with the pricing policy that's part of Chapter 3, I believe, in the Regional Transportation Plan. Demonstrate and document how they're using the work of the Equity and Mobility Advisory Committee, how they're addressing diversion issues on local routes, and specific to I-205, that there was going to be a managed lane analysis as part of that project development work and studying that as an alternative. So those are all things that as they bring a project into the MTIP, they'll have to provide documentation on how they're meeting all of these. And that's the new work that we're getting started on now within the by Metro's MTIP staff on, okay, exactly how are we going to operationalize this with ODOT and with TPAC, JPAC, and the Metro Council. So that there'll be more work on this coming forward. Next slide. So again, next steps, just real quickly, we are going to refine that performance measure analysis for the MTIP to make sure we are current with the latest direction from the new RTP. It did refine some of these investment area, the language in some of these investment area priority areas, and obviously adopted a new one with the thriving economy. So we'll refine our MTIP major project analysis on that to make sure we're reflecting the latest language. We'll update our submission requirements for those RMPP and toll projects. So that's just communicating to ODOT what we expect them to provide us in terms of information when they do submit a project amendment. And then we'll update that process description for major projects, which is as you remember back to the earlier slides, there's a documentation process, an analysis process. There's a 30-day public comment period. And then there's the adoption process. And so we'll make sure that we update the description and procedures there to reflect some language that said from the RTP that said JPAC was interested in having adequate time to review the information and before making their decision. And then we'll apply this updated process when we get requests from ODOT to amend the TIP with a new phase of any of these RMPP or tolling projects. Okay, next slide. So this is all, so that's the MTIP process. I also just wanted to mention in wrapping up that there is other work going on at JPAC or will be this year on continuing to look at the bigger picture of regional funding or funding in the transportation funding in the region and developing a strategy about how to increase, I think, the amount of revenue that's a transportation revenue that's available. And then there's going to be reporting out on the Regional Toll Advisory Committee and the Oregon Transportation Commission's discussions about revenue sharing of toll revenues. So these are whole other bodies of work that will be going on in parallel. Next slide. So with that, we'll open it up for any discussion on and feedback on this. And maybe we hit this item, and then after this, we can, I know some of you also have questions about the MTIP and Regional Flexible Fund Allocation Program direction, which we can also touch on as well.
Very good. Thank you for the information. Okay, we'll open up the floor for conversation. Councilor Berry.
Thank you for your presentation. On looks like slide number 9, you brought up the topic of thriving economy as a new topic, and I was hoping that you could expand or elaborate on that.
Sure. So these are, and I may ask him to chime in as well. This is the policy direction from the Regional Transportation Plan that says as we invest our transportation dollars in the region, previously there were the 4 objectives that we wanted to achieve with those investments, those transportation investments. And that was, increasing the safety of the system, providing an equitable transportation system, meeting our climate goals and emission goals, and then also having adequate mobility options in the region. With the update to the RTP, and this is where Kim might be able to help more, they added the 5th goal, which is we want to support a thriving economy in the region with our transportation investments. And so that is, as we then develop the MTIP and do our regional flexible fund allocation, we want to make sure that we are evaluating the transportation investments relative to those 5 priorities in terms of the outcomes we're trying to achieve. And I don't know, Kim, if there's anything more you can say about the thriving economy one.
What I would say is the goal was multi-pronged and thinking about a thriving economy from a pretty broad perspective in terms of access to jobs, access to employment in industrial areas, and supporting the growth areas throughout the region through our transportation investments, both to help grow jobs, support our employment and industrial areas, and ensuring that those employment areas have that their employees have access to those jobs across those other goal areas.
And I would imagine it might also include moving freight.
Yes, certainly.
Transporting items.
Exactly. Mm-hmm.
Thank you.
Very good. Thank you, Commissioner Savas.
Yeah, I was intrigued by that that as well, the thriving economy there on page 9. And I appreciate the counselor bringing that up and asking more questions about it. I am, have been, kind of concerned for a long time, in this area when it comes to whether it's freight or it's moving goods and services locally, whether that's medium trucks or it's, whatever it may be. We've heard from the industries, we've heard from businesses, and my background in dealing with businesses all around the region and the state when I was in business, the difficulty as this area got more populated and more congested, that difficulty had impacts, and it's still having impacts today. And the tolling conversation, I'm about to put a link here in the chat here. One moment. I'm just wondering if it's going to be, if it's really what my observation at JPAC is in the region, not necessarily JPAC, but in the region, is that there hasn't really been a comprehensive analysis of what the economic impacts are to businesses when we make some of whether land use decisions or their transportation decisions or all the above. And this particular article last night on KGW, kind of fascinating, but if you listen to the entire piece, you'll catch how a community was economically impacted negatively as a result of one particular transportation project. So just want to throw that out there, and I'm excited to see that in there. So that's great. On page 10, on 10 and 11, Ted, if you could put up 10, slide 10, or at least it had 10 at the bottom. There we go. So there we go. Awesome. Where was that? So it says here, if I heard you right, Ted, this is something that ODOT's going to provide us, right? ODOT's going to provide the documentation for all of these things. And Councilor Lewis, I'd love to have your input on this too. I think also on the slide too, when you watch it, you'll hear the ODOT making a presentation to the state legislature or a committee on Friday morning. And the answers have been consistently incomplete. So I'm wondering if we're going to be on the same path of getting part answers and not really complete answers that get down to the core issue. So my concern about this, while this is nice to see that there'll be some documentation of, it's been less than impressive. And I'm just kind of concerned that we might not really have the real information we really need to do all of this great work. So, you know, addressing diversion, for example, and that's the thrust of what was discussed Friday morning in Salem. You know, we've asked for numbers on diversion. We've asked for the economic impacts. We have not seen that in any way. And all we hear is, well, we'll just wait and see, you know, through this, what they call it, the monitoring program. We'll wait and see how that works after the fact. And I'm very concerned about that. But anyhow, I appreciate putting the slide up. And if you go to page 11, Ted, the next one. Yeah, that is 11. So this is getting back to the criteria, and I think the counselor's questions on the thriving economy again are, you know, of interest. I'm just wondering how we're going to fold that in. What are the opportunities, Ted, for criteria development around the RUFA and the MTIP going forward? Is there any opportunity to make to input that? Will we have a reasonable opportunity to adjust that if needed?
Yeah, so that's part of the process that we're starting to undertake now. We'll look back at, our starting point will be what the regional transportation plan did to analyze and define the criteria around each of these, and thriving economy being one of them. And then we'll try to make them, if we think it's needed, because the RTP criteria are looking at trying to the measures around the criteria are really looking at, you know, a system level impacts. And so they're trying to measure things at the system level with, you know, I think there's 1,000+ projects in the RTP. So it's a fairly significant impact in terms of how the system performs with and without that bundle of 1,000+ projects. It's a little, sometimes that, so with the MTIP, we probably will have in the neighborhood of 150 to 200 projects. And so we measure, when we do the MTIP adoption, we try to have criteria and performance measures around those criteria that we think will still show some significant measure of what 150 projects might do. And then with an MTIP amendment, where you're looking at a single project and how it might shift the performance of those, if you add it or subtract it from the 150 other projects in the MTIP, what that might do in terms of performance of the system. It can get a little, you know, the measures you use, the technical measures you use to do that sometimes are not as scalable, right? Like our regional travel model might be able to show some differences in implementing our performance of those criteria. Around like the congestion on the road system, for instance, but at a small scale, it might not show up, right? Whether you add a single project or not, the model might not be able to show a difference. And so we try to do some adjustment of how we look at it with, or how we present the expected performance with and without a project. Sometimes we can have a quantifiable measure. Sometimes it's going to be a qualitative description. And so we'll present those, and we'll always take input on, okay, that's not helpful, or this is we really want to know, try to understand this. And if we have the tools available, we'll provide it.
Thank you.
Very good. I can see that Kim dropped the goal statement into chat for the thriving economy, so you can take a look at that and read that as well. Any other questions, comments today? Looks like we've tuckered y'all out. Very good. Ted, Kim, thank you very much for being here today. Always a pleasure seeing you both. Appreciate the time.
Yeah, thank you.
Very good. Moving forward on the agenda. Last but certainly not least, Trent Wilson's going to give us a legislative update.
Good morning, C4 Metro Subcommittee. How are you today?
We are well. Thanks for asking. I'll answer for the entire group. Great
Love
to
it.
have you.
Thanks. Glad to be here. Really glad to be here. Love this group. So the legislative session is moving very quickly. It is, I guess, day 8 of the session, at least in terms of weekdays, but it definitely feels like it's been a month. And many of our representatives down there, or even our lobby teams down there, all feel pretty much the same. There were 280 bills that were introduced into the session. I think there's 288 now, actually. And the first deadline was on Monday this week for them to be posted for a work session. So actually many bills died early on, but it's just been really, really quick in terms of how this session has really evolved. So for us and our purposes here, what we wanted to do was give you a quick update on things that we're monitoring or tracking, or things that just probably have big, broad interest for you. And then I wanted to leave on a couple of transportation notes, because as we've been talking about this morning, those are things that Clackamas County has been monitoring very closely for a few years now. And there are a few topics of note, but not really any big decisions that I can discern at this time. So at a very high level, the 2 topics of the session really are the governor's priority for housing production. And then that's going to be in Senate Bill 1537. There's a -9 amendment that was approved yesterday out of their initial committee. It was a unanimous approval, and it's gone on to Ways and Means. There's $500 million identified in that package to advance housing production goals for a variety of different topics. Some of it is infrastructure, some of it is planning, some of it's transportation or water related, some of it's for site identification. So there's a variety of uses for those funds. TBD, to be determined on whether those funds will remain programmatic as recommended by the governor's office, or if the legislature will need to mark up some of those fundings in order to get the bill passed at the end of session. But at least right now, I think everyone is looking at that bill as at least a first effort to fund the housing production needs, knowing that in a short session, when you have limited amount of funding, can really only go so far, and more likely than not, it'll be funding that sets up a variety of infrastructure and programs that can then be funded beyond in future sessions when there are more dollars to work with. So that's the thinking for now, but we'll see how. Yes, I had heard that too, but I hadn't seen the actual number that it potentially did get limited just a little bit, which is interesting because the revenue forecast is up, not significantly, but it is positive. It's going in the right direction. And that kind of relates to a comment that was made earlier in the meeting about, folks coming in and out of Oregon, population growth being more steady than up, and sort of how that's been affecting revenue within the state of Oregon. So positive and steady, but not skyrocketing as it was a few years ago, which was really beneficial to Oregon and the Oregon budgets. So yes, the housing package is still one to watch. It's the one with the most amount of money in it. And certainly there are a lot of cities who have been watching it because there are project lists going around for transportation and water infrastructure projects in order to move housing production forward in a variety of ways. Counties have different needs in that too. That we have a huge urban unincorporated area that we serve with a lot of CPOs. And so we're monitoring that as well, just to see if there are an opportunity for that to be earmarked, that all of us are not, missing part of that game. Clackamas County has several of the fastest growing communities in the state. So we're working with a lot of folks to, at least be aware of what's happening there. The other big issue, of course, is how the legislature will try to affect the impacts of Measure 110. So that's mostly manifesting in House Bill 4002. They had a public hearing on the 7th in the evening. It was 4 hours long. It's a very long hearing, maybe one of the longest I've heard of in a while. It remains a contentious bill in Salem right now. And I guess the quick summary is that mostly they have tried to recriminalize some of the pieces of either public use or having certain amounts of use up to a misdemeanor C, which is a very probably about as low as you can get on the misdemeanor group. That's where the Democrats have started with House Bill 4002. Many of the Republicans in Salem would like to see that go up to misdemeanor A. It's a much longer maximum sentence in jail time, which is, you know, a longer time as well to sort of get out of, I guess, the addiction cycle that you're potentially in. So I'm not an expert in that ballpark, but that's where the disagreement sort of rests politically right now, is between misdemeanor C, misdemeanor A. And it's not just between Republicans and Democrats. There's mixed feelings between behavioral health workers. There's mixed feelings between public safety officers, the district attorneys, and what is the most effective pathway to do those. And even if those do or don't pass, is there appropriate infrastructure, places to send people where they can actually receive the treatment necessary? The answer is presently no. I think everybody across the state agrees that there needs to be more infrastructure regardless of what happens in terms of the policy, but there just needs to be more centers. There needs to be more places to curb where people go. People should not be detoxing in jail. People should not, you know, so we're all working in directions like this. Clackamas County has a couple of projects through our behavioral health team, through our sheriff's department, where we're trying to find infrastructure dollars to set up, you know, a stabilization center where folks can, you know, be detoured out of jail into a different location, or even, you know, build a recovery center. That's a priority for our board right now. So Clackamas County is in the ballpark of working on this too, but on the policy side, we're letting that play out between, you know, the different chambers, because that's a pretty political topic. They're going to continue meeting, although I think their next meeting was scheduled for tonight, and they will not meet tonight. So there's a few things there. Yes, Mayor Milch.
I watched a policy session with the county commissioners a week or so ago when they were talking about making some changes in allocating of funds and available homes that the county owns throughout the region, and larger facilities that the county owns. Commissioner Savas, does it look like some of those individually owned homes that are in close proximity to one another might become centers for helping in this recovery process? Is Clackamas County looking to maybe, you know, do its share in this whole shortage of facilities?
Well, I think it's moving that way, because a year ago, 2 years ago, that program was more about liquidation of some of those less efficient assets into more high density, you know, needs or purposes, in the goal of trying to address the housing shortage. And you probably heard in there, just so everyone else knows, there's also now some efforts to see how much home ownership opportunities there are for low-income families through some of those assets. At the same token we got to be mindful that some of those properties need work, need investment, and maybe they're not so efficient, power bills, those types of things. Maybe they're not located near transit. So I think there will be some, you know, not only just recognition of that, but maybe calibration on what might be best suited. The topic of, you know, whether a home can be used for a facility for care, like a care facility, is something that's already in play around the region and around the county. We have those all over. I know that Commissioner West has one of those homes near where he lives, and out in Wilsonville. So yes, there will be some exploration into that. At the same token you know, trying to capture the revenue in order to build the next wave of housing is a big issue. And so yes, and yes to your question, and which is probably a great segue into a question I have. What I'm hoping now with the concern I have is if it's got reduced from 500,000 or 500 million to 350 million. A chunk of that interested me was the infrastructure investments, because that's a huge thing for areas where we don't have the infrastructure to provide, whether that's, water, sewer, roads, transportation, and we're bursting at the seams on some of the roads that are outside the UGB of cities, because cities can't legally collect SDCs or monies, transportation SDCs or whatever, for facilities outside the city that are part of that. So, the road out to Wilsonville, Stafford Road, for example, that's in unincorporated, that's heavy traffic, and yet we don't have the funds to work with that. So I hope that this rollback does not equate into rolling back the infrastructure aspect, that which is really sorely needed in order to build housing.
I certainly can't answer that today. It's a thing that we, again, we're just mindful of very recently, and these bills, as quick as they move, they change maybe even faster. And so we'll get a little bit more of an assessment on what that reduction looks like. And there you go, Councilor Sherman, 100 million. So it cut it in half. There was only going to be 200. I guess I'll say this: there was only going to be 200 million for infrastructure anyway. And if I remember correctly, the League of Cities had like a full survey out to all cities in Oregon, and it said, "Send me your projects. Let me know what you need." And that list was over $1 billion. And so 200 million was not going to make a dent in it. That did not include any projects that counties also need to support that sort of similar infrastructure growth. So, I mean, 100 million is certainly less than 200 million, so that's too bad. But I would say 200 million wasn't going to, get everybody across the finish line anyway. Just want to reflect again, like, my understanding of these projects was not so much to solve the housing production needs, but to sort of set a next foundation for how the governor wants to keep chipping away at housing production goals moving forward. And I think she was hoping to use this money to really set up the offices that would help support the work, moving into the future, when there will hopefully be a larger budget to work with than just what's available in a short session. So maybe just quickly want to close on the transportation topics that are happening right now. It's been referenced already. Yeah, it's actually a good segue right there. It's been referenced. I'll start with that actually. So a couple of weeks ago, Oregon Truckers Association filed a lawsuit against I believe it was ODOT, or at least maybe the legislature, on how to fund on the inequity of funding for what trucks pay versus what light vehicles pay into the road system. And there's a study that happens every couple of years that helps inform the legislature how they need to rebalance that equity piece. And I think over the last couple of years, it has been very clear, and that report has shown that truckers through the weight mile tax pay an exorbitant amount more than what light vehicles pay into the road system. And if you listen to the Oregon Truckers Association, they'll be quick to say that they are the highest taxed trucking group state in the nation. And if it's not the highest, it's really close, maybe the top 2 or 3. But so it kind of informs, like, to truck goods in Oregon, it is very expensive for those trucking programs. And what I've heard on the other side, and Commissioner Savas has heard this too from a couple legislators, is that in order to have similar funding parity between light vehicles and heavy trucks, the gas tax would need to raise about 30 cents to meet a similar threshold of funding equity, which is pretty impressive. You might know that our legislators find it really difficult to raise gas tax, in meaningful amounts. In 2017, I think it raised just a few pennies, maybe a nickel at most. And so that's where the political tension is that just to get the big funding package in 2017, we had a 5-cent increase plus a bunch of other funding, increases as well. So talking about a 30-cent increase is a really big deal. One reaction to that has also been that there are 3 bills in session right now that are, at least one is designed to sort of study that inequity. The other 2 are to lower the weight mile fee. All of them are introduced by Republicans. So I think that means they have a very challenging path forward to get across. But with this lawsuit, that gives them a little bit more gravitas. The Joint Committee on Transportation will hear those 3 bills on Thursday night, tomorrow night. And that meeting starts at 5 p.m. if you want to listen into the testimony for, I bet the OTA is going to be there and talking about, what that difference looks like and what needs to happen. And you can imagine legislators are talking about the challenges on both sides. If you lower the weight mile tax to try to mitigate the lawsuit, that's not great for, funding transportation projects within Oregon that are already pushed against a wall right now, as we're watching ODOT, asked for just O&M funding. So that's not a great solution. The other side of that, like I mentioned, was raising the gas tax up 30 cents, which is, a challenging political solution. And so I don't know what they're going to do. I don't know if these bills have, the wings to get across the finish line, but it'll be an interesting conversation tomorrow night at the Joint Committee on Transportation. So that's a big one. And I think it plays well into highlighting the need for why there's urgency in moving towards a transportation package in 2025. There's a lot of interest and momentum around that. One thing to note is that at a meeting last week, Representative McLean introduced a framework, if you will, a roadmap for how she'd like the legislature to begin moving towards 2025's transportation package concept. They didn't get a chance to really talk about it too much, but it is in the meeting materials. You can go look at it for the 6th, I think, Joint Committee on Transportation on the 6th. So that's a place where you can go at least find the document. It's, a couple dozen pages, and it really highlights that they want to go do meetings throughout Oregon with different communities to identify and just confirm where is their need, what should they be focusing on, and really do the big themes still play out. Do we need to focus on safety, arterials, funding, operations and maintenance? And it seems like while there is a lot of interest to fund the big projects that still haven't been completed from 2017, including yours truly, the I-205 project, there are also just broader funding needs that need to be addressed for how Oregon pays for transportation infrastructure moving forward. And that seems to be the biggest puzzle right now beyond the projects. But I also say legislators are going to legislate. It's hard to talk about money without talking about votes. And that's going to be a key piece of the political pie. And we'll figure out how that all gets doled out in the future. But at least that framework provides an idea of how legislators are thinking about moving towards 2025 and talking about a potential transportation package. And then the last thing I just want to share, and it's already been referenced today, is the special subcommittee on transportation planning. That good group, of which most of you went to testify at the community meetings. They meet every Friday at 8 o'clock in the morning. So that's a super great time to drive down to Salem. But on Friday last week, they talked mostly about diversion. They had a big presentation from ODOT. Commissioner Savas found that KGW article that he was referencing earlier, where it sort of gives a pretty good synopsis of the discussion. Many things that you've, I think, heard before from ODOT were sort of introduced there. They did use a couple of new projects that I've not heard them reference before, showing as like examples of where tolling and tolling mitigation and modeling has sort of worked, in the favor of the discussion for creating what I think they would try to have called positive diversion and positive community reception. You can read it for yourselves or listen for yourselves. And it's my opinion that the legislators of the dais didn't quite, take it at full speed. They had a lot of questions about it, including Representative Hartman, who was quick to point out that this project that they referenced, yes, it did have, lower congestion, but it also had 2 additional lanes. It had added transit and it had added bike lanes. And so not quite apples to apples in terms of a great example to sort of use as a positive project. So that was a nice call out to see that, especially to see that Representative Hartman is quick to Google a project that's referenced, as a positive example, to make sure that before ODOT gets off the stand, they have to, at least address what's going on with that project. And is it the same as what we're talking about here in the state of Oregon? So that was really good. Again, they're going to meet every Friday. They meet this Friday at 8 o'clock. They're supposed to talk about, I believe it's toll collection logistics. And so some of you I believe, were on an email thread with Representative Hartman asking for questions that they would like to submit to ODOT to answer at different intervals during these deep dives with the legislature. And so for those who introduced questions that were related to tolling logistics, this is when that conversation is likely to happen. Feels like a good chance, in my opinion, for those conversations that Mayor Bialostowski has been able to elevate with related to, how is this funded? What needs to be in place for that to be successful? What are those administration needs that are being paid for with the toll program, and so on? So I'll be curious to see if they get to those topics this Friday.
Very good. Thank you for the information. Any other questions, comments from the group?
Just one thing I want to share, going back to the earlier part of that discussion about the three bills regarding the OTA, and that is that for those of you that may have heard Travis Brower a couple times last year, late last year, suggest or say in response to questions, essentially paraphrasing here, well, I did some back of the napkin math, and if we raise the gas tax 25 cents a gallon statewide, we could fund all of these big projects in the region, IBR, I-205, the Boone Bridge, so on and so forth. And my response in one of those meetings was, Travis, thank you for that. That's a lot less impact on families than the tolling program. So per household. So what I, if they reduce the if they reduce the weight mile, that's going to be less revenue for ODOT, which is going to compound their problems, right? And if they raise the gas tax 32 cents a gallon and tolling remains in place, the financial impacts are going to be exacerbated on families. But there again, in lieu of, if tolling goes away for some reason, then that 32 cents a gallon is much easier to absorb than the tolling program itself. So that'd be a fascinating discussion to watch, and I will be watching that, but they're in a tough spot, and I hope that they can come up with some kind of a resolution here soon. Thank you, Trent.
Very good. Very good comments. Any other questions, comments you'd like to share in our last minute of C4 Metro Subcommittee? Very good. Thank you all for the time today. Thanks for joining us. Always good to see you all. And we'll see you again soon. Take care.